In all of your experience working with organizations and leaders and being on the strategy journey, what would you say? What is the perception of business architecture, do you think, among executives and maybe other roles you've worked with on the strategy journey? Just curious.
You know, again, there are a lot of different perspectives over the course of my career. And I would say, when did the first term business architect even come up? I would say the first time I was actually termed or given a title of business architect for an entire function or, a division of a company would be around about 2010. Okay, so it's probably been around for about 10 years or so. 2010, 2011 is probably when the term business architect started, coming about. Before that, we were all functional architects, solution architects, business analysts, senior business analysts, directors, project managers, whatever it is that we could have been called. Similarly, around that same time, the concept of product management also came about. So there were a lot of people who are business architecture practitioners who may have moved into the design, innovation, and product management or service space versus those that have looked more at it from an infrastructure, operations or technology space. And there has actually been this divide between the two, which doesn't actually serve the business architecture practice well, because actually business architecture is about bridging the gap between the two. But yet that's actually what happened. And I think that right now we're at a time when it needs to come back together, because technology is such an important thing, especially digital technology, that needs to sit in the middle again and actually be part of the solution in how it actually serves different customers through whatever channels or how you would use technology. And, technology, as we know with AI, is completely capable of replacing some of the activities and functions that people would perform. But, so certainly there have been a lot of things that have happened in the business architecture ecosystem or sphere in how these different roles, etc., have evolved. I mean, I've been in organizations where at some point, maybe for 18 months, everybody wanted to be a business architect. And then all of a sudden, some other senior person comes around who may be actually a product line owner comes in. It results in two business architects leading two completely different separate things. And all of a sudden, you're fighting over the title of who is a business architect. And so sometimes people make it, organizations that are not agile, who do not understand how to literally practice the strategy journey, would inadvertently replace a business architect when it's not completely warranted. And there's politics associated with business architecture that I've seen throughout, my career, again, with this shift, because business architecture is not necessarily just a role. Okay, it's something that a lot of different people in various different roles along the whole strategy journey would actually do or perform. And actually, I've got a page in my book where I actually talk about the different levels of architecture and where the do's and don'ts of architecture. And you can see that as being different elements of business architecture that are being practiced by different structures or different sets of stakeholders in any enterprise or organization. So I really see business architecture as something that every organization should be living and breathing, which is why I have it as a full stage in the strategy journey. And there may be people who have a specific title or role as a business architect, but actually everybody in the organization, wherever they are, has actually a role to play if you really, really take the true meaning of what is business architecture in doing their part of business architecture, however big or small it may be. And if there was an organization with a central business perspectives or meet everything is validated so that it's and helping, management and people to make the right decisions about the way forward. And so that's actually what makes it a very challenging position and role, because you are the middleman, the messenger, the person that pulls it all together. You're trying to be all things to all people, pulling together all of their desires, their needs, their wants in one place, and being the source of truth, or the objective, open-minded person that is actually saying, when I pull all of these things together, this is what it's saying, whether you guys like it or not. Okay. And so it is an extremely challenging role in the way that it's matured. If an organization is now looking at this business architecture role as this central function, etc. And if you are going to have effective business architecture, then you have to empower these business architects to have the mandate to be able to say what they need to say, and provide the right advice, agnostic of who likes it and who doesn't like it. It doesn't mean that the business architects are the ones who get to make the decisions. Okay, the business architects are there to provide the options, the strategy, construct it in a certain way or with the right perspective to give the organization and all these other stakeholder groups their optionality about how to proceed. They probably are the least powerful group, if you think about it, because they don't actually get to make any decisions. Right? They get to make recommendations, which may or may not be followed. But what you have to do is empower them to be able to make the right recommendations, and not put them in a position where their recommendations and the data or what they do is compromised, because ultimately that is at the detriment of the business. If you don't have this strategy, business architecture function, or central area where you can always get the truth and the right data from it, and the right optionality from it to help you make your decisions, then basically you could be taking your organization and your decision making down a completely wrong path, where the noise becomes the dominant thing, and that noise may not necessarily be the right thing for the company or the organization. So it's an extremely critical role if you go about having that central function. And I've been in companies where I've had that central role function, and it can go both ways. Either everybody hates you and wants you dead, wants you gone, because in some cases your role may be to work out what functions don't need to exist, and your recommendation may be leading to a lot of redundancies and closures. But at the same time, it's also really rewarding area to be in, because you may also, if you are given a mandate, be in the position to make all the recommendations about where the company spends all its money, the funding, what is the future direction and the roadmap, and provide all of those recommendations. And there may be a sort of like a PMO or project management office function that sits with business architecture that is literally recording or storing all of those things. And I think that's one key thing that needs to be separated from what is business architecture versus what is project management. Those two areas have to work side by side. They will have natural tensions, and those tensions need to be accepted as being healthy, and they have to be given equal footing to be one, to execute but with a level of adaptability, and the other one being the source of truth, versus the people who are just doing things versus the people who are just thinking things or wanting certain things to be done. It's a really, really difficult and challenging role, and it requires somebody who is very, very open-minded, very good at looking at different perspectives, very, very good with data, and also has the personality and integrity to not subscribe to being compromised, which is extremely challenging, because you could have people who love you or hate you, and you don't even know who your friends are sometimes. If you're in this business architecture role, why is somebody buying you lunch or coffee? What do they really want from you? These are the sorts of things that can actually happen. It's political, but at the same time, if you have the role or the mandate to support the board or the C-suite, and you are that strategist or source of truth that sits behind, the scenes, giving them the objective viewpoints and the data to help them make their decisions, that's when it's extremely rewarding. That's when you see the value that you're providing. And that is actually essentially the value that the business architecture provides. It's there to give that objective source of truth and optionality to help senior management and the C-suite and the board make the right decisions. And anybody who's sort of doing all the other work around it, they will have different aspects of business architecture in what they do, because they will be the ones providing the data into what this, construction, this actual real architect absorbs and takes in to help put everything together and shape everything. So yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting role. There's all these different aspects to it, and there's so many different ways that you can practice it and enter it as well.
Yeah. I love this role because I do think it's just at the forefront of change. I think we get to be involved in some of the coolest things. I also want to echo, Julie, one thing, one theme that you were talking about, which I think is really important, and that is, business architecture is not just performed by the business architect, but all these roles and are going to use it and leverage it for decision making and contribute and things like that. I think that's important. I think that's also the turning point when you really get business architecture embedded in an organization, is when it goes just beyond the role. So I think for buy-in and socialization, and back to some of those challenges I talked about at the beginning, I think that's a really important point.
Well, yeah, I mean, personally, I'm really happy that business architecture has matured and it's being recognized, because as I mentioned, at different stages of my career, you could be made redundant because an entire company doesn't see the need for a business architect. And then all of a sudden, at the same time, you could also be performing or doing the wrong things if people actually suppose that a business architect is actually a project manager or is there to do something else as well. So it's still not very, very clear cut. And actually, that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book. And the book isn't called Business Architecture, it's called The Strategy Journey. Right. And I put business architecture exactly in the fourth stage as the stage where everything sort of starts to come together and it's being shaped. Because to some extent, that's actually how it's evolved. And also that's where it's placed in terms of when from a process perspective in how you would actually define strategy or transform a company. That's when it actually takes place. You've got to have these other stages before and after for it to really, really work. And so I think it's almost found its own home. And again, I think there is a journey for all companies, which I've termed the strategy journey, just being as open as possible to describing it. I didn't call it the business journey. I didn't call it some other journey. It's a strategy journey that can be applied to any problem that exists, be that a new service, be that a new business, be that somebody's career, be that anything that could be a problem that involves you getting your hands dirty and making it your business to actually do something about it. So I think that there's different, it's a very, very, it's still an evolving space as we have talked about. And at the moment the strategy journey is marked and put a relatively comfortable and clear home or picture, dimension, a perspective of where business architecture is operating at its best right now in that fourth stage of the strategy journey.